Small ranch.
Small ranch.
Lots of cats.
Lots of land.
Yeah.
Waterfront.
Donkeys.
Donkeys, okay. And lots of cats. Thank you for joining us. I'm Adina Dragasanu. I'm a local realtor here in Vancouver, and today we are talking about how to buy a home in Vancouver with a very special guest. We've got Justin here. Justin is a 37-year-old tech entrepreneur and a pioneer with a design and branding background from Cape Town, South Africa. From what I understand, Justin used to think that by this age he'd either be a billionaire, in prison, or dead, and never gave much thought to saving up to buy a home. But now, a little bit older, wiser, humbler, and here in Vancouver, the thought of home ownership has resurfaced. And I know, Justin, you mentioned to me before, if you were thinking of buying a house, you'd love something that you could put your own touch on, redesign, and live happily ever after with your partner and beautiful baby angel cat. And from what I understand, you're not even quite there yet because you're still on a work visa here right now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Only 18 months.
18 months, okay. So you're looking to, I guess, get your PR here and then eventually plant down roots and buy a property?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I figured since I work in real estate, I should probably participate.
I think that's a good idea. And what do you I know, nothing about you is really conventional, Jason. You're a big thinker, right? A dreamer. You like creative things. When you talk about owning a home, what do you picture? Like, what would be your dream?
My ideal would be a modest home on a beautiful piece of land and real hermit vibe. I really appreciate good design, and so either the opportunity to manifest that myself or to buy into that,
Okay.
Love a good craft.
Oh, a good craft, a good project there.
Yeah.
Okay. And, in Vancouver and in life, anything's possible. You can have anything, but not everything, right? So it usually all comes down to budget here.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a sense of what your budget would be?
See, this is a good question. I should probably be able to answer that question, but it's the $1 million mark that's got me kind of not stuck, but where I have my biggest questions about budget, because the way I understand it here, once you hit $1 million, bizarrely, you magically now have to come up with 20% of a down payment.
Yeah.
And that changes the economics, a lot of it. So with that, I feel like my budget's $999,000.
99 cents.
Yeah, definitely. In pennies. But obviously less is better.
Right.
I'm not looking to spend as much as possible, but that's actually the reason why I would say under $1 million.
Threshold. Right.
Is, yeah.
For the down payment, which a lot of people are in that boat, right? One of the most challenging things I think with getting into the market is there's two things, right? One is qualifying based on your income, how much mortgage you can get, and the other one is saving up the down payment that allows you to buy that place.
Especially if your life savings took a 14-to-1 transition.
Coming over from South Africa.
Yeah, so I think that's why I think in my position, it's just, I kind of feel like I'm in a good position to buy, but still starting on the ground floor.
Ground floor. Yep. Well, and I think, the journey up the property ladder is, you really do have to look at it as a ladder, right? Most people, especially in Vancouver, or really, I think almost any market in the world that's as developed as we are, most young people are not buying their dream forever home out of the gate with their own savings. Like, it's just not happening, right? But what Vancouver does allow is a lot of different options where you can start to get your foot in the door, right, with a condo, and then work your way up the property ladder over the years. And you're still young. You've got time.
It's very kind of you to say.
And now in terms of, Vancouver somewhat well since you've been here, like in terms of your ideal neighborhood, location, features that you'd like to have in a home, what comes to mind when you're thinking about this place?
Oof, I could always learn more, I think. One of the things I found out that walking is, there's no substitute for walking a neighborhood to really get to know what it's like.
Yeah.
So to that end, the neighborhood I've walked the most is Mount Pleasant.
Yeah.
And just the nature of my life, that's where work is. I kind of like the Main Street vibe. That whole Mount Pleasant area and what the kind of real estate that it offers feels like pretty much the sweet spot, but that is a relatively uneducated perspective, or say a new perspective. For example, like Kitsilano, wouldn't say no to Kitsilano, but all I've heard is that real estate is smaller or older, and so I've just never really spent as much time down there, and it's further away from my work, and I do like the lifestyle of walking to work.
I think that's a big thing. And we're seeing that with a lot of home buyers right now. I think with real estate, people don't realize it's not just about the walls right in your home. It's about the lifestyle you have. How much time do you spend inside, out of your home, getting to work, from work? So being able to walk to work is part of that.
And it gives you the optionality to be a one-car household, or car optional if you prefer. And I like that because I barely drive now, and I think that's kind of how I prefer it. Might just be a novelty coming from South Africa, but
I think
being close to work has a lot of benefits like that sort of compound over time.
And I'd say, for someone like you who wants, I think we're looking to get you in on the ground floor, get you into a property now, but eventually
I want to stop paying rent. That's what I want to do.
But to eventually work your way up the property ladder, you want to look for somewhere that you enjoy your lifestyle, but also has good resale value. And Mount Pleasant, we've talked about, is a very dynamic neighborhood that does have a lot of potential. With all the job growth that's happening in there, all the infrastructure growth. So I think Mount Pleasant is actually probably the ideal neighborhood for you. And you had put in there outdoor space, cat friendly. We need to make sure that anything you buy allows cats.
Yeah, that's
right?
Sadly, that's not optional anymore. Yeah.
The cat is staying, and you said privacy, vibrant. So would I be right in saying you want something that kind of has a neighborhood residential feel, like, good, what's the word? Like a nice dynamic neighborhood where you feel like you're in a good community versus a big high rise with
and specifically if you were to live right next to another huge high rise. I don't want to get to know my neighbor in a separate building at that level.
So like having that residential homey feel, but being in the location where you get to benefit off being that high density neighborhoods where you could walk around. But no.
Though I've learned that being close to the ground can also be quite noisy. So I'm really difficult to please, Dina.
We're not going to make you happy.
Have it all.
No. And, my favorite analogy is like dating. You never get it all. So.
It's one of the biggest things from obviously like renting, the prospect of putting that money into something I own is obviously the financial side. But it's actually the ability to paint and like, I don't know, fix something that was done. Like in my current building, someone has put the drawers upside down. To fix it is so much trauma that I'd rather just move.
But
what I'm saying is that like it's because I have to ask permission to do something, and so for the most part, like my ambition is quite humble. There is just to have a choice and not to have to ask permission to create the space that I want to create the way I want to create it.
Right, and have the independence and the pride of ownership that it's yours. No one could tell you what to do.
And someone will walk in one day and be like, hey, this thing is different from other people's.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of my vibe. And also I think what I want most out of a home is something that's a bit more distinctive. The prospect of living in a cookie cutter box like my next door neighbor. Yeah. Gosh, that's why I need to customize it because,
you need to be different. You're unique.
Yeah.
You weren't born to blend in, Justin. Wait, what do you think about lofts? Mount Pleasant has a lot of loft properties as well, right?
Love a good loft. I've lived in a loft.
Yeah.
So I know the I assume they're relatively similar here as they would be elsewhere. They can be a bit drafty. Temperature control can be nice.
And it'll get a little warmer at the top. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes they creak and sometimes that sort of stuff. Other than all of that, which I'm well aware of, that's kind of like always I guess how I would see myself in a loft with a good bit of base brick. I do like walls. I've definitely grown, having lived in a loft, I've grown an appreciation for walls. The ability to close the door is like not to be underestimated. But if you own it, you can create space. It's cool.
So you're going to be challenging.
I'm also a problem solver.
Yeah, you're also a problem solver. You'll find it. So before we get into the process, I guess I'd like to know, what do you know about the home buying process? What do you know about the market? What do you know what to look for in properties? Where are you at in terms of your knowledge and confidence in those?
Learning fast, but coming off a base of zero.
Okay.
So I have a good sense of how the market behaves.
Right.
Because of my job. So I can kind of see how it moves in real time. And I know things like what new homes represent, new development represents as a buyer.
Yeah.
And why that's cool. And things like the warranties are very appealing. it's like having a motor plan on your car or whatever they call them here.
Peace of mind that you could buy a newer property with warranty. You don't have to worry about making any payments for maintaining it.
I've also lived in new buildings where it's just like, sometimes it's good to know how something is going to settle as well. So it can't please me, but that's fine. And so I guess I'm kind of thinking in that smaller kind of affordability band below there.
And I think you're in the right place, right? Because one of the most important things with real estate, especially in Vancouver, it is such a big kind of monumental thing to overcome, and you need to strategize and plan ahead for it. So you're kind of at the perfect time where it's something, it's on your radar, you have a target, and now it's about helping put in the pieces in play for you so that you could get there. I'd say your first thing would definitely be to talk to someone about getting a pre-approval, right? And figure out exactly what you qualify for, what your payments look like. And if what you qualify for isn't, that million mark exactly where you want to be, what can you put in place between now and the next year, right? Or 18 months, or when you're going to be ready to get there. Because the biggest, we talk about real estate, you have this trade-off between price point and location and size and quality and age of building, right? And what we need to figure out is what are the parameters that are fixed, right, that we can't move past, which for most people is pricing will be one of them, right? And what are the ones that we could kind of bend and trade off to get fixed there. So I think if we use the $1 million mark, the nice thing is you actually have quite a bit of options in Vancouver, especially in Mount Pleasant, like you mentioned, even looking maybe into Fairview or Kits as a secondary, third option. Even from the examples you gave me, you kind of have a range of going from 1 bedrooms to 2 bedrooms, older buildings, newer buildings, lofts. You could even potentially get one of those, the character stratified homes in Mount Pleasant that we had shown on Real Tours before, where it's, a big house that was built back usually in the 20s and 30s. They were stratified in the 90s, and you could get 1 to 2 bedroom suites, and kind of like owning a piece of a home. It almost feels like you own the home without having to maintain it all and look after it. And something like that could be an interesting option for you too, I think.
My sense is that people renovate for 2 reasons. They enjoy it and it makes property more valuable.
Yeah.
Right? How much of a premium does one really pay for a freshly renovated? I guess my question goes to, does being renovated matter, or is it kind of more economically prudent to save yourself $100K, buy something older, and then pump that $100K into your own home?
So that's a great question, right? And it's a really, the answer depends on a lot of different variables, right? If you buy an old house, right, and you renovate and you put in a new roof and new windows, you can add a lot of value to that house. When you're buying an older strata property or condo, a lot of your value is in the actual building itself, right? So what you have to be mindful of is that if you're buying into a building, say like a 1980s building with shared laundry, and it might need, new pipes and new roof, and has a lot of work coming up, you could do a beautiful kitchen, but your value is still not going to be equal to the value in a newer building, because a lot of that is in the actual building. So I think when people are looking to do renovations in Vancouver, especially in condo properties, your biggest thing is that you got to look for solid building, right? So it could be an older building, but you got to make sure it's been well maintained, well looked after, proactive strata. You don't want to be dumping a bunch of money making your unit beautiful. So in a newer building, you have a much less risk, right? So the challenge with a newer building is that the positive of a newer building is you'd have way less risk. Typically, you don't have big costs like replumbing or re-roofing or doing balconies. So I'd say your sweet spot is if we can find you something that is not necessarily, like a total wreck, but it doesn't show well, right? Like it has like dark walls, it hasn't been cleaned, and you could do some of the cosmetic updates. The other thing that I find adds a lot of value is when we do staging. Staged properties will always sell for premium. When you find places that aren't staged, right, that is just like, it just doesn't show well and it's cluttered.
Is that where the money is at?
I actually would say that is where the money is at, right?
Okay.
Again, like the online dating, it's like bad photos, like dark, cluttered photos, not clean and well kept, but not big ticket stuff is usually where you'll get your best return. Renos. And I think the best investment you can make with real estate is buying it and holding on to it as long as possible. So for you, buying a place that's, a bit unique and different allows you to buy it and hold it for 10 years than if you bought, a smaller space that was very cookie cutter and you hated it and wanted to move in 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
I would buy the more unique place for that reason, right? Because then.
So are you suggesting that literally what I should buy now is something that I should aim to live in 14 years?
I would say as long as possible. So, the way you make money with real estate is you buy it, you pay off your mortgage, and you hold it as long as you can.
Yeah.
If you can't get to what you want, that's how people work their way up their property ladder. But you do have to keep in mind, every time you sell your real estate, right, you're paying your selling fees, you're paying property transfer tax, you eat away at about 5% of your equity, right? So if you can stretch to a place that's $1 million now, you're typically going to be in a better position than if you buy for or $600,000 now, you sell in a few years and then keep inching your way up.
Even if it means you pay it off faster. Do you know what I mean?
Smaller. Well, that's what you have, that's where it could get intricate and you can see. But again, you're eating away, so you could be paying it off faster. But if you're eating away at 5% of your equity every time you buy or sell, you have to look at, are you paying it off at a faster pace than that equity is disappearing every time you buy and sell?
Okay, but put it this way, what if I were to go on the much smaller, cheaper side now, but with a goal to cover as much of the equity as possible in a shorter space of time? Then the option is to either keep it or get another mortgage and buy a second piece of property.
Yeah.
I mean, versus, something like that you could see yourself in for longer, that is going to take you a long time to actually pay off, and the amount of interest you invest in it is significant.
And that's a good strategy too. Like, we do have quite a few clients who buy, to me, a very low risk purchase would be a 1-bedroom condo in Olympic Village or Mount Pleasant in a good concrete building, under 700,000. Like, those things you could sell all day, every day, right? And you could always hold it as a rental and move up the market. Your only risk, though, is that if the market, so the benefit of buying is that you're pegged into prices, right, as inflation creeps prices up. So if you buy at $500,000 now, and now you're trying to save up for the next place, if prices increase at a very fast pace, you have less leverage in the market than if you were bought into the market at $1 million. Right? So that's...
Damn, man.
So it's not... So I wouldn't say there's no absolute answer for everyone. But, when we look at home ownership, not just as an investment or get rich quick thing, really, I always say one of my most successful clients in real estate was a lady who bought her property for $20,000, back in, I don't even remember the year. It was 1970s. It could be. But she bought it, in the 1970s. We helped her sell it. It was one of my first listings back in 2012, and we sold it for $1 million. And she lost her mind that, she owned this property worth $1 million. Did she really make $1 million? No, because, if she wants to stay in that market, she sells her house, but she has to put it back in. But she wouldn't have, she was single mom because her husband passed away young. She worked in a grocery store. She had no income. She wouldn't have been able to afford to rent or live in Vancouver if she hadn't owned that property. And I think that's what people our age don't see, that sometimes it's the idea of us getting into the market and just paying it off and just holding it if you could afford to hold it. The benefit is that when you're 60, it's paid off. You don't have to worry about it, and you could afford to stay in the market. So if you can do that...
Or liquidate it and go live on a beach in Tahiti.
100%, right? Because let's face it, CPP is not going to cover, our rental costs. So this idea of just buying something that's your primary residence and just trying to pay it off, you can't go wrong with that. Can you do a bit better by being more strategic and buying investment? Potentially, it kind of depends on your circumstances.
Yeah. The affordability is the one aspect of it, but I don't have an expectation that this is an investment that's going to create the wealth in my life, if you know what I mean. Yeah. So it's not like a priority to maximize output, but it's more about making the right first step. Start small or start at the max level.
Totally.
And stuff like retrofitting conveniences like air conditioning and stuff like that. Is that a choice you have to make when you buy?
Yeah, that's a great question because, air conditioning is pretty rare in Vancouver. Vancouver's not a market that was used to having air conditioning in buildings. Most buildings that you see air conditioning in, it's because they're newer within the last 10 years and they were kind of premium, higher end buildings. But what we're starting to see now is that buildings are allowing people to retrofit their units and add in heat pumps. So what that kind of requires is the strata to get an engineering report, and those engineers look at the building and see where you can install the heat pumps. You typically have to have a balcony because that's where the big heat pump actually sits, and then you put split systems within your unit. And we're seeing that more and more, specifically in Yaletown. We're seeing it in Mount Pleasant and other parts of the city. So if you want air conditioning, you don't have to necessarily buy a building that already has it in.
When we started, you said that I think you said pre-qualifying was something that I should do.
Yes.
Based on our conversation, because that's still something I should
100%. I would say actually getting pre-approved is really important, and getting pre-approved with a really good lender, like someone who specializes with mortgages. I say don't just walk into your bank and tell them what you want to do, because you might have someone there who knows mortgages really well, but it might be someone who doesn't, and they might not give you, the full scope of your options as someone who does mortgages all day, every day. So even if you're dealing with your bank, you want to deal with a mortgage specialist or deal with a mortgage broker who could shop around options for you. And I'd say engage with them as soon as you can. Figure out where your parameters are now. And if where your parameters are now are not enough to get you to where you want to be, then create that strategy, right? And ask them, what can you do to build up your credit, right? Now, maybe start creating a savings plan. Look at opening up a first home savings account. Look at contributing to your RSPs, because you could use those towards buying your first place. So there's a lot of things that you could be doing, and the earlier you start doing them, the better prepared you'll be for when that time comes.
Gosh, I wish I'd had that advice 10 years ago.
I know, it is. But honestly,
would I be now?
And, even with down payments, I think one of the most challenging things I see is that for young people, I'm in my late 30s. When I got into real estate, I was 23 when I started selling real estate. And I think I bought when I was 24 or something around there. And it was really tough. It was hard. But I look at young people now, it's even harder for them. And the reality is, if they actually started saving, or their parents had set them up for savings like very early on, even very small, the benefit you get from that compound interest over the years would actually be fine, and they'd be able to buy a home now. But if they didn't get that kind of advice early on and start, the longer you wait, the harder it is. So it's very hard to wake up at 37 and say, okay, I need $200,000 to buy a home, right? But the younger you are, the earlier you start, the more you can leverage that compound interest and some of the tax programs that the government has.
Especially when I worked out cumulatively how much rent I must have paid.
Yeah. Well, that's a big thing, right? People look at the cost of buying, and sometimes they don't look at what's the cost of not buying, right? And how much you're spending. If the average, if you're paying $3,000 a month in rent, that's $36,000 a year. In 3 years, you're paying $100,000, right? It's pretty. And I think that, again, when we look at that, it's pretty nauseating. And again, when you look at it in the big scope, right, what happens when you're 50, 60, like how much money you've spent in rent your whole life and where prices could explode to is pretty terrifying. So that's why, I think home ownership, our culture likes instant, quick gratification, making lots of money. But really, it's a very foundational, like a strategy to really build yourself a solid foundation for just making sure you're set in life and you can enjoy your life when you're young. You might not enjoy it now because you don't get your avocado toast and your lattes. But, to have that stability and that freedom and that hedge against inflation is monumental, I think. So, Justin, you sent me a few examples of places you had looked at REW. And what I actually liked about what you sent is there was quite a bit of variety in there. You had everything from a building from like 1975 all the way up to, some stuff in the 80s. There was one in the 90s, actually two, that both of those buildings haven't been fully rain screened, and I'd cautious you about. Not going to say the names in there. And there was even a newer one off Cambie that was 2020, and that actually looked a little bit more modern. And
I thought of you. Yeah.
So when we talk about searching for a place, and when I mentioned it's like dating, I say we start with this, cast a broad net, start exploring your options, and then real estate's actually about eliminating your options to find the best one rather than it is about finding this magical one and creating it. So, what I love is the diversity in here. And in terms of how that journey works is that usually once you start looking, you go out with your realtor and you start telling your realtor what you like. And the realtor is going to start showing you things that you might have not thought of, right? And showing you what are the trade-offs with each place. Okay. And what's really interesting with these is that they all have kind of different trade-offs, right? And it would actually be hard for me to take, of the options you said, take one and say, okay, that's the best one, right? Until we really know where your parameters are and what you're kind of willing to trade off and not. But I would want to ask you is, how comfortable would you be about buying into a building where you might have $20,000 to $30,000 of special levies in the next 5 to 6 years?
What is a special levy?
Okay, so the special levy would be so the buildings have you'd be paying your maintenance fees, right, on your strata. So your maintenance fee on a building is really your cost, your share, right, of contributions towards maintaining the building on a monthly basis, right? So the strata has their budget, They collect the fees from all the owners based on your
Yep.
entitlement, which is your square footage divided by the square footage in the whole building. And you're paying your monthly fees. A portion of those fees do go towards something called a contingency fund, which is a big reserve fund for big projects that come up and emergency expenses. But often stratas in Vancouver don't have a contingency fund big enough to cover everything that's going to come up to maintain the building.
Right.
So typically a contingency fund wouldn't cover, say 2 of these buildings haven't been rain screened. It's kind of debatable whether they may or may not need to be, right? Yep. But if they did, they'd have to come to the owners and ask for a special levy. And they would take that, they'd say, okay, it's going to cost us $3 million to rain screen the building. We're going to divide it up by everyone's unit entitlement, and this is your share.
Right.
So, rain screening could be one thing, but repiping could be another thing, redoing windows, redoing balconies, redoing roofs, So there's a few here that I know from experience have pretty significant possible expenses in their horizon based on their depreciation reports. What would your comfort level be with buying something like that, having to put that money into it versus buying something newer, paying a bit more, but not having to worry about extra expenses like that?
I don't like unexpected expenses.
Okay.
Forewarned in this respect.
Yeah.
We can plan for that.
Yeah.
I would be mighty upset if that happened unexpectedly. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I guess, someone like you would be able to probably cross out entire buildings with listings not to visit, and that's obviously.
And part of it is eliminating stuff that we go like absolute no, stay away from, and then another part is, hey, these buildings are okay, but you're going to have this cost and this cost and this cost, and are you okay with
Is there a good way to actually get a sense of that up front, other than relying on someone experienced?
I'd say the quickest would be someone who's already, sold in that building or read the documents. They could give you the Coles notes quickly.
Right.
As a buyer, you're going to need to do your own due diligence, right? So you're going to need to read through the strata documents of any place. Typically, you would, back in the day, you would do it after you wrote the offer, then you'd get all the strata documents and review them. But in our market, because things move so fast, we typically will request the strata documents after you viewed a property, sometimes even before you viewed it, and let you know. There's a fabulous place that we sold in Kitsilano last year. Beautiful building, older concrete building, fabulous location, fabulous views. And when you look at the depreciation report, which is the report that outlines all the expenses, it did work out. It could be $80,000 to $90,000 per unit for a 1-bedroom condo. But if you want that kind of view, there's nowhere else you could get that.
Yeah,
okay?
I guess.
Also, I'd say another, when we look at the properties you had picked out, there's also some intricacies that you won't see of those properties until you go into them. Like, for example, one of them, I know because our client recently viewed it, it faces a bus stop, right? And you wouldn't necessarily know that from the listing. So I think one of the reasons it's valuable to start looking early on is then you start seeing these properties, you start seeing the trade-offs, and you start understanding why they're selling for the price they are. There's no summary online that you could just look it up and see it. It's not going to be in the listing. In BC, it's actually, the laws are very buyers beware. It's not the listings agent's job to walk you through those or explain it. It is their job to give you the documents, but you're going to have to read through them and go through them with your realtor to understand. Yeah. That's why you want a good realtor. And ideally, that's why I think one of the biggest mistakes home buyers make, especially first-time home buyers, is not, thinking they know it all or wanting to find it all on their own instead of relying on people who are true experts in their field, right? And who have that knowledge. I think the best thing you could do to set yourself up is when you work with a very qualified and experienced mortgage professional and a very qualified and experienced realtor. They can help you shortcut through a lot of those things, eliminate things that aren't going to work, and walk you through it rather than you trying to do it all on your own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not interested in that path.
No.
No.
So, learn from other people's mistakes and let people who have that expertise guide you, right?
For sure.
Rather than doing it yourself.
I think one factor, back to your question about whether I'd be prepared to or want to spend that, I think also depends on the size of the strata. If it's like multi-100 unit and it's a faceless, I'm very much more anxious about that scenario. Whereas 12 people that I know where they live, I'm comfortable with that.
And they have deep pockets, so they're actually.
Let's say I know where they sleep, and that's fine by me.
Fair enough, and you'll see, right? Like the people who are drawn to certain buildings often have things in common, and I actually think someone like you might even be interested in. We've talked about co-ops, right? And you'll see a lot of co-ops in the West End, on the West Side. There's not very many in Mount Pleasant. But those would be older buildings, right? Smaller. They were built before the Strata Property Act, and which I think was in the 60s or 70s that came into play. And they are much more intimate in terms of how they're run. A co-op in our world is a corporation-owned property. So you're actually buying shares in a company that owns the land and the building, and then you lease your unit. So there's buildings like that. Now qualifying financially for that's even more challenging. You need 35%. But the price point's lower, and people, the board will actually interview new owners, right? And make sure that they approve of the person coming in, right? And that they're kind of
I'm scared even if I had the money.
They would love you. And then you have a bit, but the reason I bring it up is you tend to, I don't want to say birds of a feather flock together, but people are drawn to places that kind of reflect, how they are. And then you'll find...
shot at community, right?
Exactly. You'll definitely find a community in buildings like that and a better price point.
But you say 35% down. Yeah. Can you still get
typically mortgage? You can, but limited lenders. And yeah, it is more challenging, but your price point's also quite a bit lower, and you could get very unique, interesting places.
Interesting. So maybe rung number 2 on the ladder.
Yeah, it could be rung number 2 on the ladder, or that could be the end goal. It could be the penthouse in the co-op unit.
He told you.
Yeah.
Small ranch.
Lots
of cats.
Lots of land.
Yeah.
Waterfront.
Donkeys.
Okay. And lots of cats. Well, I think that wraps it up for now. I think that was a pretty good intro to the home buying process for you. So thanks so much for coming in, Justin. And I hope you guys learned something from this and have a few takeaways to get you started on your home buying journey. If you found this valuable and you're thinking of getting started with your home buying journey, or maybe working your way up the property ladder, and you have questions that you'd like answered, connect with us by clicking the link in the description below, and we can have you here going through your scenarios.